what a sight that is. The two Pratt & Whitney double Wasp 18-cylinder air-cooled radials of 2,000 horsepower each, powering the A-26. The same R2800 power plant at the front of the P-47, and the 2,500 horsepower Bristol Centaurus 18 powering the Fury. Side by side in the post-war US Air Force stationed in Germany, while the Invader and the Sea Fury were both significant Korean War combatants.
The A-26 in the Pacific against the Japanese.
And there's the A-26 pulling up and away from the two fighters. In fact, this Invader is itself a Korean War veteran. It served with the 452nd Bomb Wing, specifically the 730th Bomb Squadron at Busan, South Korea, from June 1951. It became the mount of the squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Howe, who christened it Sweet Eloise II after his wife, and those are the colours into which it's been restored. Over 2 years in the Korean theatre, this very aeroplane racked up nearly 1,900 hours of combat flying. At one stage, it was lucky to survive a direct hit in the bomb bay from flak during one of its missions in theatre. Sold off by the US military, it became the first A-26 to be converted into bore-rake bomber configuration, and it was used for forest fire suppression by various companies around North America before becoming an historic aeroplane through the hands of various operators it passed. It was acquired in 2022 by its current owner, Polish businessman Marcin Kubrak, and it has just undertaken its transatlantic ferry flight this summer, arriving at its base at Katowice in Poland in late July. This is an aeroplane that was unique among American combat aircraft types in serving in 3 major wars, in World War II, Korea, and in Vietnam. It was designed, the A-26C, like we see here with a glazed nose, served first in the southwestern Pacific with the 5th Air Force in 1944. They were then deployed to Europe with the 9th Air Force, beginning with the 386th Bomb Group, stationed at Great Dunmow in Essex. And it performed rather better there than it had in the Pacific. And they started to be fully assigned to the 416th Bomb Group, again of the 9th Air Force, then stationed at Meuse-Roche in France from November of 44. Single-engine fighters for their part, beginning with the P-47. As single-engined, single-seat fighters go, this is a big one. One of the great US Army Air Forces fighters at the European theatre. An aircraft that weighs some 7 tons, but which, despite that, has outstanding flying characteristics. To begin with, and the first Thunderbolt mission with the 8th Air Force was flown over France by the 4th Fighter Group from Debden in Essex in March 1943. It wasn't particularly long range, nor especially good at low level, but as the design was developed, that began to change. The P-47D model, like this, was the most produced, and it really began to realise the design's true potential and to serve as an outstanding air-to-ground asset, as a fighter bomber, as well as an air-to-air fighter. And Colin, we were talking earlier when we saw the B-17 flying about the lack of suitable escort fighters when the B-17s began to be deployed to the European theatre. This was one of the aircraft that changed that.
Absolutely right. The B-17s and the Liberators suffered very heavy losses because they were doing the daylight raids. The belief was that the bomber would always get through. However, along came the P-47 with Duxford, the P-51 Mustang as well. That really did change the whole landscape so far as the air war over Berlin is concerned. What a fantastic aeroplane this is.
Really is so charismatic, and it's so wonderful that Fighter Aviation Engineering has brought this aircraft back to the UK. It was operated for many years here by the Fighter Collection, was then sold overseas to the United States, but in 2018 Fighter Aviation Engineering brought it back, and it's been based here ever since, now finished as a 9th Air Force aircraft of the 492nd Fighter Squadron, based in Italy in the New Forest around the D-Day period, named Nellie B.
P-47s, of course, were based here with the 78th Fighter Group before they converted to Mustangs, and they were reluctant to give up P-47s. Big aeroplane, lots of protection, and they felt that they felt much more vulnerable than the P-51. Of course, their attitude soon changed. P-51, probably the fighter aircraft of the Second World War.
The P-47 still had a role to play in spite of that, because, as I say, it was such a good air-to-ground platform, a really stable gun platform, carried on having a major purpose to play, not least with the 9th Air Force, particularly supporting ground forces in the D-Day period and thereafter. Landing on underneath the P-47, John Dodd and John Corley in Martin Kubrak's magnificent A-26C Invader. Colin, you described the Invader just now as a serious airplane, and I think we saw that beautifully demonstrated by the two Johns there.
Yeah, absolutely. Just such an impressive machine.
Yeah, and I hope we see it back here pretty soon. It's been doing a bit of a run of show appearances out of Duxford in recent weeks. This Korean War veteran, A-26. John Dodd it was who led up the ferry flight from the States. A very exciting experience that was too. With more than 15,600 built, the P-47 is actually the most numerous American fighter of the whole of the... For now, taking the place of the Thunderbolt, the Fury. Aircraft conceived in the first instance as a Tempest replacement for the RAF. The end of the war saw the RAF no longer having a need for such an aeroplane, but the Fleet Air Arm of the Royal Navy did. Sea Fury, and it became the Fleet Air Arm's main carrier-borne fighter and fighter bomber in the early post-war years, coming into service in October 1945, and it was most famed for its role in the Korean War of 1950 to 53, where it was flown by both the Royal Navy and the Royal Canadian Navy, and its most illustrious exploit there, the sole British air-to-air kill of that conflict on the 8th of August 1952, when a Royal Navy Sea Fury was credited with having shot down a MiG-15 swept-wing jet fighter.
British made fighters. But it's
and landing underneath Dave Pulliston after a typically stylish show with the P-47. The Sea Fury's career with the Royal Navy was relatively short. It was soon replaced, being one of the last generation of piston-engine fighters, with the early jets, such as the Supermarine Attacker or the Hawker Seahawk. Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve Squadrons carried on with their Sea Furies until 1955. This one, though, is a non-navalised Fury, one of those built for the Iraqi Air Force, and hence it's a Fury ISS, Iraqi single seat. They were also used by the Pakistan Air Force, among others, and quite a lot of the airworthy examples today, like this one, are ex-Iraqi. This one, another member of the Fighter Aviation Engineering fleet, is painted as the first prototype Sea Fury Mark 10. And you can tell it's a prototype because it has the appropriate colour scheme of British military aircraft prototypes of the period, with camouflaged upper surfaces, yellow undersides, and a yellow P in a circle on the rear fuselage. Quite a rare example nowadays, still being powered by the type's original Bristol Centaurus engine, like one of others, which had re-engined with American Wright and Pratt & Whitney power plants, including some we've seen here in the past, but not this one.
do we not see people